Welcome to the KOMO Sports End Zone podcast with KOMO Sports Director Niko and Najee Moye.
Well, if there was ever a time for a rapid reaction edition of the KOMO Sports End Zone, it would be this. He's Najee, I'm Niko. We're going to get right into it. Geno Smith traded to the Raiders for a third-round pick. This leaves Najee so many more questions than answers, but a stunner from the Seahawks in every way in what has been a wild week. So much for the Tyler Lockett goodbye week, because you have DK requesting a trade. Who knows how that is now affected by this Geno Smith trade, but your quarterback in 22, 23, 24 with a record of 28 and 23. Geno Smith now reunited with the coach who believed in him to give him that starting job, Pete Carroll, taking over for the Raiders. We're going to dive into a lot of the what's next and things like that, but Najee, this is a stunner in every sense of the word. We talked about it in this show. There was the contract extension they were trying to work through, but there was still one more year on that deal. But based on everything Mike McDonald and John Schneider said, we love Geno, he's this, he's that, he's our guy. I mean, they couldn't have raved more about him being the guy for the future.
We love Geno,
and
but
we
love a third-round pick from the Raiders more.
Right?
You know, when this news broke, I was in the booth. I was producing a show, my 4 o'clock show, and honestly, Taylor Corlew, our producer, web guy extraordinaire, sent me an Adam Schefter tweet.
Yeah, sure.
And I had to look at it for at least 5 minutes to make sure it wasn't from a parody account, because that's how shocking that this trade actually was. Take out, you know, this how this week has been. Geno's our guy. Geno's our guy. We love Geno. We love Geno. We love Geno. And I felt like whenever that tweet was sent, the entire city, you were here in Belltown, this entire city all said, huh? What? I heard it from even inside the producer booth. It was kind of insane, honestly. First reaction, a third-round pick. One, the Raiders got a steal, by the way.
And well, I think, a lot of people out there would say that that's good for the Seahawks to get a third-rounder if you're not going to be able to sign a deal. But I see what you're saying.
The Raiders got a steal because the quarterbacks on the roster right now was Aiden O'Connell and Garner Minshew.
And you're happy to use a third-round pick to upgrade that. Yeah, sure.
So, and Pete Carroll has his guy, Pete Carroll. I mean, we're going to get into that layer of it in a second. But also, the Seahawks don't have a quarterback now.
Well, yeah.
The Seahawks don't have a quarterback now.
Yeah.
Now Geno has had some ups and downs, and I point to a lot of the downs being because maybe the play calling last year. The past couple years, he's had two different offensive coordinators.
Well, 3 in 3 years.
3 and 3, yeah, three
if
different
you count
offensive
Kubiak moving forward, but yeah.
3 and 3 years offensive coordinators, and then he's running for his life most of the time for behind that offensive line. And just this week, we did a podcast about Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, and I said many times, I'm like, hey, this offense is struggling because of the offensive line. And I asked you, if you listened to that last episode that we did just days ago, I asked you, Niko, is this a Seahawks teardown of the offense? And you said no.
Well, I didn't think it was. Now it's a full dismantling.
now it's a full teardown. It feels like a full teardown now. I just, a third-round pick is not exactly it's a steal. Like I said, Pete Carroll has a quarterback now. And it's the quarterback he had before.
Yeah, so now it's, okay, 2 big questions I've taken out of this, and I want to dissect each one with you here.
Sure.
The first one,
because I'm still kind of in shock.
And I think that in this moment we're shocked, but as the conversation moves forward in the days to come, we hope this video can help people navigate what's next, assuming it takes at least a few days to come down.
Yeah, as a therapy session. Here.
So the first thing is, does this affect the DK Metcalf trade request? On a few fronts. Yes, the contract was the main crux. We talked about it. DK needs to get paid in his age 27 contract. Well, guess what? The Seahawks have some money freed up now. And it doesn't mean like all of Geno's money goes to DK. No, they were only off by a few $1 million. I'm just saying a few million. It's more like give or take 10 or so. But
that's a few in the big scheme of things.
Yes. But you have Geno's contract off the books. Yes, you have to pay another contract of whoever comes in next as your next quarterback. But ultimately, you now have the money to at least give DK closer to that $30 million mark, which is projected to be what he wants. So before we even get into who's next and dissect what could be next from the quarterback position, do you think DK, I'll give you my opinion in a second, do you think DK's trade request is rescinded and he gets a new deal now that there's a little bit more money available, and now there's a quarterback who's not going to be kind of lasered on JSN? Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's kind of how it was the second half of the season.
How do you feel if you're JSN right now, first of all? But also, if DK truly wants to be traded to a contender, how does trading his quarterback help the Seahawks be a contender?
Sure.
In my eyes right now, the Seahawks take a step back. This is a big step back. Twitter is calling for John Schneider's job right now. They're thinking that the Mariners are suddenly running the Seahawks.
Well, the Mariners love it. They're like, hey, our bland offseason looks pretty darn good right now.
Now, if the goal of this, and I understand what you're saying as far as like cap and money and keeping DK, I get all this. But that being said, I don't think this has much to do with the money with DK Metcalf.
Right.
I think you could re-sign DK with it, but I think DK, if he wants to leave, he'll leave.
Sure.
Well,
let me. This just came to my head.
Right.
Okay, let's say you trade DK as we talked about.
I mean, Sam Howell's not the guy.
No. I think we saw that in that Green Bay game, and I certainly saw it a lot in training camp last year.
Right.
And a lot of folks who observe this team do. There's another facet to that. Let's say you still trade Metcalf. You suddenly
then there's a full.
You have a lot of draft capital, whether you use that on a quarterback or you use it to trade up to get one of the big guns in this draft. That's not usually their style, but there's a lot of possibilities and options. But again, the first thing that came to my head was the idea that there is a little more money available to give DK what he wants.
Right.
And whether it's Sam Darnold, and we'll talk about this in a minute, whether it's a rookie quarterback, you want that person to have as many weapons as possible.
Right.
And
they won't have them.
If you somehow keep DK now with JSN, that's a much better situation for any quarterback than opposed to JSN, as great as he is being WR1, and who knows what's after that, right?
Yes, I do agree, but also I don't know.
It can go anyway.
It can go either way.
This is a wild week.
This is a wild week. Let's talk about who is available, because I mean, Sam Darnold is the first thing that comes to mind. He's probably the best quarterback that's available right now, given the record as far as what we saw with the Vikings last year. Another name that's floating out there is Russell Wilson.
Could you imagine?
The Seahawks have the chance
to
do the funniest.
That if he comes back?
He has the chance to do the funniest thing right now. We have to bring him on the show. Russell, if you're out there.
I
have, I floated that idea to a couple.
I'm kidding.
Well, I floated he's available. I mean, he will be available and he wants to play. But I floated that idea to a couple people.
Well, because here's the thing: if the next quarterback is done via the draft, right? And I'm not talking about Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. I'm talking about somebody a little bit later, like a Jackson Dart,
right?
Which he's getting rave reviews based on everybody who watches him. You either throw him into the fire and you do it hopefully with your best weapons available, or you let him learn for a year or two under a vet. But you never. I mean, so there's a lot. Again, we're getting way down like the wormhole here. But you kind of have to at this point.
You kind of have to, and you consider, you get the third round pick, which for Geno is like, I don't know if that's market value for a quarterback of Geno's stature. I mean, people love and hate Geno at the same time, but at the same time, a third round pick is not high for a quarterback.
Well,
a starter for the past couple of years.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's
But do you think that they could put together a package to get one of the top two guys? I don't know.
I don't think so.
That's selling the whole entire farm unless they love a guy.
You're holding on to this capital, assuming you don't assuming the free agency route isn't their deal.
Right.
And let's say I'm just going to give you a hypothetical. Somebody like Shedeur Sanders falls.
Right.
It seems like Cam Ward won't fall.
Shedeur
is more likely to, even though I don't think he will, but he may.
Right.
And suddenly you're there at 18, but listen, and you can take him there. Or maybe he's there at 12, but you can package some picks together and move up from 18 to 12.
Trade a job.
Something like that. I'm throwing numbers out there as a hypothetical, right?
Right.
But it's just because, again, if you trade DK, the opposite of what we were saying earlier, you suddenly have maybe a very late first or an early second round pick in your arsenal as well.
You could put together a package for DK and the picks to get into that top 10.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that are now available to this team, like it or not, that
and I think most of Seahawks
fathomable.
I think a lot of Seahawks Nation right now is not liking it. The vibes are not good.
Because here's the thing. Again, love or hate Geno, as you mentioned.
Right.
I think there's a reason people rave about him, because I think he is surgical when he has time. Mm-hmm. The fact that he had no protections, we talked about often last season, and at one point, like late October, he's still leading the NFL in passing yards, despite running for his life.
He threw 55 times a game. That's why.
Yeah, so there's things about Geno that were good.
Right.
There were also some very forced and very untimely interceptions and things like that cost this team probably a playoff bid.
Right.
If you want to boil it down to one thing, but also how close were you without Geno? Here's the thing: franchises that don't have a starting quarterback, and you look why the Raiders want Geno, right?
Right.
Because Aiden O'Connell and as much as we love him in this state, Gardner Minshew weren't getting it done.
Right.
You look at some of these teams out there that are struggling to find that real and mainstay quarterback, and they've been in NFL purgatory for years. Now, Geno is certainly not Pat Mahomes or Josh Allen, But he was good enough to get you to the playoffs.
And we said this in previous episodes. He was the best option. And you asked me about Geno Smith's contract. What do you do?
Yeah.
You know,
and it was like, who else is out there?
But that being said, I did think this was Geno's last year with the team. But I thought they would keep him because I didn't think there was a better option out there for him, and I still for the Seahawks, and I still don't think that there is. Yeah. I think any option that they get, whether it be a rookie, whether it be a 85,000-year-old Aaron Rodgers, I think Sam Darnold's better off staying in Minnesota. And Daniel Jones, don't even get me started on Daniel Jones. Russell Wilson would be hilarious, and Justin Fields would be cool. But Geno was the best option available, and they traded him away. I'm still shocked.
Yeah, I mean, you could make the argument that maybe should he replicate what we did last year, Sam Darnold could be a better option.
Could be.
But that's very high risk.
If you keep DK?
If you keep DK, that's what I was just going to say. Because
DK.
Look how good Darnold was with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, all those guys, Hockenson at tight end.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
I don't know if that offense, if the Seahawks offense now is even comparable to Minnesota's offense.
No, I don't
We
think
saw it actually face-to-face, and it was definitely...
Well, I think that if you're, you can probably be appealing to a Sam Darnold if you have DK.
Right.
If you do not have DK... And it's great. Again, I'll say it again. As much as we all love Jackson Smith and Jigba,
right.
I think a lot of his success was predicated on the fact that teams had to pay attention to that 6'4", 235-pound guy who runs a 4.340.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, it leaves so many more questions than answers. The idea that I could sit here, or even you could sit here, as much as we follow it, and anybody outside that Seahawks room, quite frankly, can sit here and be like, wow, they're going to sign Darnold, then they're going to do this. I'll pump the brakes a minute here. I mean, maybe, but there's a lot of huge questions now that, it comes down to DK and it comes down to this quarterback, and it comes down to all these draft picks now and what they do or don't do. It's just a wild time to be a 12 right now.
A lot can be said for a new coach, Mike McDonald, going into his second year, 10 wins.
Yeah.
But it's a lot that can be said for a coach to get his guy.
Yeah.
Find a guy, a new coordinator, and you got to, especially considering how the offense looked at times last year, I think you should fix the offensive line no matter who it is that you get as a starter.
Yeah.
And your guy could be Justin Fields.
Sure. And you mentioned Russ a minute ago, I know tongue in cheek, so to speak, but you would be essentially asking Russ to do what he did when he was a rookie and not be Russ win us the game. Russ, hey, manage the ball game, hand it off, roll out a little bit. Now, is he that guy anymore? No, that was a long time ago.
No.
But it's, I guess the point I'm trying to make here is if Clint Kubiak's offense is as different with a lot of 11 personnel and that sort of thing with two tight ends that we all think it's going to be.
You don't need a guy who's going to throw
You need somebody that's going to protect the football, which was,
right,
for many reasons that we've discussed, not necessarily Geno's forte in 2024. And so... the quarterback they bring in may not be a guy that wows you.
Right.
And I don't think it will be.
Do you think it'll be Taysom? Do you think it'll be Taysom Hill?
I don't think it'll be Taysom Hill. Like everybody's saying, Darnold's the best case scenario, and it's a possibility. But Justin Fields, who hasn't been a full-time starter, in a bit,
he's still very young.
Yeah,
and
he
shows promise.
And if you're running this kind of scheme.
Maybe.
That's why he started decently in Pittsburgh this past season.
Yeah.
There's going to be some similarities in those offensive schemes. So it's possible. So don't expect the quarterback. Maybe it is a big bombshell, but don't expect it to be that because it may not need to be that. And the Seahawks, you mentioned Mike McDonald a minute ago.
Right.
This guy doesn't screw around.
No, he doesn't mess around.
Holy cow.
Because even before Tyler Lockett got cut, they cut 4 guys.
Yeah.
And then Tyler Lockett got cut, a fan favorite, and then they traded Geno Smith. The teardown's happening.
Yeah, it is happening. I want to point that out again because you won 10 games last year. You only missed the playoffs by a tiebreaker.
But you didn't make the playoffs.
That's not good enough.
And that's not good.
And that's what I like about Mike McDonald. Even if for a minute here we're like, whoa, what is happening?
Well, because it is kind of a head scratcher considering what you pull the trigger on a 3rd-round pick.
Yeah, sure. No, I hear that.
You can get guys.
They must know something.
You can get great talent in the third. Well, know something about the draft?
About what they're doing next.
They
must
know
have
something.
A concrete plan. We might get Darnold. Maybe they already know they will.
Before we started recording this podcast, you were playing back sound with John Schneider
from
last week, talking about Geno's a guy. We're talking a lot about the draft and how they're doing their homework, They must know something about a guy in the draft. It may be Jaden Milroe.
You never know.
You never know who could be. But
they got Russ in the 3rd round,
and they got
wasn't the top guy
and,
in that draft.
and exactly. Tom Brady was drafted in the 6th round.
Sure.
Brock Purdy was the last guy in the draft at all, and Daniel Jones was drafted 6th overall, by the way, who is also a free agent this year. And if he comes to the Seahawks, so help me, God.
I don't think that's happening.
I don't think that'll happen either. But I've heard his name at places, and Adam Schefter has too. He's reported too. So that would be unfortunate.
To my point a minute ago about McDonald. Maybe a little nerve-wracking for 12s, all of us at this moment. But what I will say, I like the not messing around, that not making the playoffs is good enough, and the fact that you're saying our defense is going to be that darn good.
The defense was great last year.
We can rip this offense apart.
Well, the defense was great last year. I think if the defense was great last year, is it good enough to tear down the offense and win 10 games again? Maybe. Well, it depends on who your quarterback is. A lot has to happen this offseason. I think a lot of people in Seattle who are also Mariners fans are kind of thinking, oh, well, at least they're doing something.
Sure.
Right.
Sure. Them and the Kraken, right?
Yeah, them and the Kraken. The Kraken traded half their team today.
Yeah. So it's wow.
Yeah. There's a lot going on.
A stunner in every word. This is more stunning as far as how surprised we are than the Russell trade, because that drum was beating for so long, for years. And I think that the surprise, I was like, wow, they actually did it. But It wasn't like you were sitting here like, oh my God, they did what? It was like, oh, it finally happened more so.
That being said, the Russell trade happened the same day they cut Bobby Wagner, and that 1-2 punch was a lot.
That was a lot. I still put that day above this and above the Tyler DK day the other day for sure, without a doubt.
But they're not any days to sneeze at.
But this is more surprising.
It's very surprising, especially because of what they got. Now, I mean, that being said, do the Raiders trade for Geno Smith if it was a 2nd-round pick? No, I don't think they do.
Well, and so now the question becomes. Again, I think the biggest question, obviously, is who's next to quarterback. But even right up there, tied with it, is does that change DK's situation we talked about a minute ago? And I really, there have been a lot of receivers the last few years.
Would you keep DK? Would
you
resign him? I think you
find a freaking way to keep DK now.
Really?
Because if you are trying to attract a quarterback here, it's much more appealing with DK. If you're trying to roll with a rookie next year, without DK.
Ugh.
With JSN being a great option,
but getting triple covered every game.
I mean, you can run the ball 1,000,000 times a game, but you have to at least have the threat of something. And JSN is it, but DK changes it. And you can roll next year with a quarterback that has a chip on their shoulder like a Justin Fields, and run that run game with K9 and Charbonnet, DK and Jackson Smith and Jigba, and you can have a really darn good offense even without Geno. If you don't have Geno and you don't have DK and you're substituting those with other folks,
Here's the thing, though. You've got in this league, you have to sack the quarterback and score points. Mm-hmm. They're trying to sack the quarterback with this defense, and you have to score points. The best way to score points in this league right now is still through the pass. And
it's a new league. Yeah.
It's a new league, and I know people are trying to run the ball more, and I wish the Seahawks would run the ball more. Believe me, but I asked myself the same question: would I re-sign DK Metcalf if I could? It depends on how serious you are about this teardown.
Yeah.
You want to tear down the offense? Let's tear it down. Get rid of DK. Yeah. Trade him. Get whatever you can, and then if you love. But that being said, John Schneider said he is doing his homework on this draft. He must be all in on this draft. I'm not saying this is the type of draft where you'll see 2 first-round picks like we had a couple years ago.
Yeah.
At least on offense. You are asking a defensive coach and Clint Kubiak, the offensive coordinator of the former offensive coordinator of the New Orleans Saints, to work magic.
Yeah.
The New Orleans Saints. Think about that. I know. You know what I mean?
The idea was, remember we talked about it in the show, like, oh, yeah, well, Kubiak's got more weapons here in Seattle. Well, if you pay DK, that's not really necessarily
and even with DK,
certainty.
And even with DK, Geno was still running for his life behind a bad offensive line.
Yeah.
I mean, he had a great year. JSN had a breakout year, but that being said, it's like this offense wasn't exactly gangbusters with DK either. And it wasn't gangbusters with Geno either. So I say tear it down, throw it away.
Wow.
See how it can happen.
And they may.
And it seems like they're doing that now. Shout out to Pete Carroll for getting his boy, though.
Yeah, you know what? Pete believes in Geno. Pete gave Geno a chance and saved Geno's career quite frankly.
And Pete,
because people are saying in 2022, you are nuts if you start Geno Smith and you led him to the playoffs.
Yeah.
Geno, I think, will forever be remembered as a guy who had a really nice resurgence here, was a really nice bridge after Russell Wilson's decade in town, did some really cool things here. Did he anger fans at times with those interceptions? Sure, but I think by and large, say you look back in a few years, but yeah, Geno had a nice run here, and I think that's something really cool that
a couple 10-win seasons.
Yeah, the 1-10-win season,
the 1-10, yeah.
couple 9-win seasons, not bad. And so you go from here, and this is absolutely, in every sense of the word, another turning point for this franchise, most especially if DK does get traded. But remember, John said, listen, he said this right after the day after. He said, listen, the worst case scenario here, we have, he listed off DK's accolades. We have this big, fast, incredibly athletic wide receiver still lining up for us in 2025. He's not going to make the trade unless it's the absolute right thing. Even if DK wants it, there's no trade clause here. I mean, right. DK can sit out in camp. Mike Holmgren on local radio the other day mentioned how Joey Galloway did that, and then they still brought him back, and then eventually later on they traded him. The Seahawks have control of that situation to a more extent than DK does, and maybe even more so now that they have more money to play with here. But I guess the point here is,
how much of this is about the cap? Do you think they're going to go crazy in free agency?
Well, that's why I'm speculating here, right? Because you don't give up at least a reliable starter that almost anybody would agree he's not top 5, but he's somebody that can win you a championship if he gets hot. He's somebody that can absolutely get you to the playoffs. We've seen that before. So to get rid of him for a third-round pick,
I don't know if Geno is a championship quarterback.
He can win you a division. He can win you an NFC championship if he gets hot. If you run into the right teams in the playoffs.
That's true.
Anything
is possible.
I am not saying Geno Smith is a top 5. I'm not even saying he's a top 10 quarterback in this league. But I'm saying he's good enough to make you a decent team. And so you're getting rid of him at this point where you won 10 games. You're trying to look forward. There's something else in the works here.
Yeah, there's something. There has to be
your point when you're saying
there has to be something else coming.
And so when you say it's a cap thing, I think that has to be part of it because now you have more room in the cap to sign DK Metcalf, to re-sign Ernest Jones, and to go out there and either get your quarterback of the future or bolster that offensive line and then have the draft. You have freed up enough money to do all those things. The big if being the DK question.
2 things. One, I'm curious about what the Raiders would do in the draft now because a lot of people are hoping that Shedeur Sanders drops to that 7th, I think, pick that the Raiders have. Mm-hmm. Do they draft a quarterback? Who knows? Number 2, Niko, if you were the Seahawks and if you were John Schneider, what do you do?
As far as?
Do you resign DK, you just said?
Right? I really would like them to. I know a lot of folks are against that and say, well, he's demanding a trade, get him out of here.
Do you sign a quarterback from the free agency? Or do you draft somebody? Or
well, and here's the thing: we're not in those. Nobody else is except John Schneider, Mike McDonald, and a couple other folks.
Right.
If you're saying there's some crazy scenario out there where, say, the Chargers are yeah, we'll give you the 22nd pick for DK. I think you have to do that. Ooh. I think if you're the Raiders, and let's say the Raiders and Seahawks pull off another one. Hear me out on this. And I don't think this is going to happen. But let's say the Raiders were hey, we'll give you number 7 if you give us 18 in DK. And then you can draft Shedeur maybe. I'm not saying. It all depends on if the Seahawks are in love with one of those guys. You only make a move like that if you're absolutely in love with one of those guys.
And
I don't know that they are.
And they're going to fall down. I think Shedeur and Cam Ward are both going to be gone in the top 5.
Remember how many people I think it was the 20 which draft was it? Was it the 22 draft when everybody was talking about Will Levis, Malik Willis, yeah. And they were saying these guys are first rounders. And well, the only guy taken in the first round that year was Kenny Pickett, and he's now a back. He's got a Super Bowl ring, but he's got it as a backup. And so this could be one of those drafts, and I think by all accounts it is. It's deep at defensive tackle and things like that. So we've got a lot of things to talk about.
Yeah.
It's not all mock drafts all the time anymore. Nope. We've got about 6 weeks until the draft, and there's going to be so many things to discuss as more develops here. But the bottom line – go ahead.
No, I was going to say I think the Seahawks will find their quarterback before the draft starts.
I think, that and John Schneider said they will have the DK situation resolved one way or another before the draft.
I just can't believe the Seahawks are looking for a quarterback right now. I thought they'd have another year with Geno.
Well, honestly. You know what? Listen, I'm going to throw one more thing out there before we go. And you and I talked about this, and you saw it sitting next to me in the press box at Lumen Field. How many times was DK wide open?
Sure.
And whether it was Geno under duress or whether it was Geno having some kind of a security blanket and JSN in the middle of the field, DK was just not even looked at.
How many times did you see DK Metcalf get in fights with DBs?
Well, yeah, but besides from that, though,
right?
He did not get the targets. Went from 61 in the first half of the season to 41 in the second half. They dropped off. Yes, the emergence of JSN, but there were times Geno wasn't even looking at him.
That's true.
When DK had one-on-one coverage, and so a lot of those times just had his man flat out beat. Even if DK doesn't have his man beat, he's 6'4", 235. He's going to win that jump ball, right. And Geno didn't even look at him. And so the point I'm trying to make with this is, yes, it's contract driven, but if you're DK Metcalf and Geno wasn't even looking your way. maybe that's part of the reason you want to trade in the last year of a contract because Geno's looking your way less and less for whatever reason.
Right.
And you're going into a contract year.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, he wants to sign a new deal. Nobody wants to go into that last year, injury risk or otherwise.
Yeah.
But that dynamic has changed.
Oh, yeah.
It has changed. And regardless of the options out there, whether it's a rookie, whether it's a Sam Darnold, whether it's whoever they look at next,
I just don't think the Seahawks can try a rookie out there behind.
I don't think so.
Line.
No, not unless
without DK behind that offensive line. There's no way.
But I think the point I'm trying to make is that DK, I think there's a better chance, not just from a salary cap perspective, but potentially because Geno stopped looking his way a little bit at the end of the season.
I get that.
So, wow. We have a lot more to talk about as things develop in this situation. Najee,
right.
Wow.
How about a Friday afternoon news dump?
Hey.
Yeah.
Never a dull day in Seattle sports. He's Najee Moy. I'm Niko Tamori, and this was a special rapid reaction emergency podcast, whatever you want to call it, at the KOMO Sports End Zone. Go Hawks. We're hoping whatever's next is better than Najee putting the hat on.
That was bad.
We love you guys. Thanks for watching and listening.
Bye.